The world does not always change with a declaration. Sometimes it changes in silence. In the quiet arithmetic of enriched uranium, in the geometry of a warhead design, in the cold calculation of a threshold crossed without announcement. Right now, multiple indicators suggest a strategic boundary has been approached. Not confirmed, not declared, but possible. And possibility at this scale carries its own momentum. This is not speculation. This is structured analysis, grounded in technical assessment, historical precedent, and the observable mechanics of escalation. But here's the problem. Most public discussion treats nuclear proliferation as a binary outcome, weapon or no weapon. Reality is far more nuanced. The path to capability involves multiple thresholds: enrichment levels, stockpile accumulation, weaponization engineering, delivery integration. A state can approach the threshold without crossing it. It can demonstrate capability without deploying a weapon. The danger lies not in uncertainty itself, but in misreading the signals that distinguish preparation from performance. This is where things change. A nuclear capability is not a single achievement, but a complex system of interdependent components. It requires fissile material at weapons-grade enrichment. It requires warhead miniaturization compatible with delivery systems. It requires command and control architecture that ensures secure, reliable deployment. Without these elements aligned, even advanced enrichment capacity remains latent rather than operational. So analysts watch for specific observable preconditions: centrifuge cascades at higher enrichment levels, stockpiles accumulating beyond civilian requirements, delivery systems tested for nuclear compatibility. What happens next depends on pattern recognition, not isolated data points. A single enrichment report means little. But when stockpile accumulation coincides with warhead testing, when delivery modifications align with command upgrades, when diplomatic positioning shifts alongside technical progress, that convergence carries weight. This is how professionals assess risk, by cross-referencing technical, diplomatic, economic, and informational signals into a coherent picture. The goal is not prediction, but probability weighting. Not certainty, but preparedness. This is where most people miss it. They focus on visible symbols, centrifuges, facilities, declarations, while overlooking the invisible engineering that makes a weapon functional. Producing fissile material is only the first step. Weaponization requires parallel progress in warhead design, triggering mechanisms, delivery integration, and safety protocols. Without these elements, enriched uranium remains material, not munition. So the real question is not whether enrichment is occurring, but whether the full architecture of a deployable capability is in place. But here's the problem. Technical progress can serve multiple strategic purposes. It can prepare for deterrence. It can strengthen negotiation position. It can signal resolve to domestic audiences. It can even serve as insurance against regime change. Disentangling these possibilities requires contextual analysis. What is the historical pattern of the actor? What are their stated objectives? What constraints do they face? Economic, political, military. There are no universal formulas. Only careful, iterative assessment that updates as new information arrives. This is where things change. Geography introduces additional variables. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely a waterway, it is a global economic artery. Approximately 1/5 of the world's petroleum passes through this narrow channel. Any disruption, real or perceived, ripples through energy markets, insurance premiums, supply chain calculations, and national security assessments worldwide. When nuclear capability intersects with control over strategic chokepoints, the implications extend far beyond the immediate theater. What happens next is shaped by the psychology of deterrence. Once a threshold is approached, de-escalation becomes exponentially more complex. Leaders may feel constrained by prior commitments. Domestic audiences may demand visible strength. Adversaries may interpret restraint as weakness. This is the fog of strategic competition, not as confusion, but as pressure, the gradual narrowing of options as stakes accumulate. Understanding this dynamic is critical, because crises rarely spiral due to grand strategy alone. More often, they escalate through a series of small, rational decisions that, in aggregate, produce outcomes no single actor intended. This is where most people miss it. They assume that military superiority determines strategic outcome. Modern deterrence, however, is rarely decided by asymmetry of force alone. Nuclear capability, even latent, changes the calculus fundamentally. A state with even a small, uncertain nuclear capacity can impose costs that outweigh conventional advantages. This is the logic of asymmetric deterrence. Not to win decisively, but to make escalation so risky that it becomes strategically irrational. The goal is not battlefield triumph, but political constraint. But here's the problem. Rationality is not a constant. Leaders under intense pressure, facing perceived existential threats or domestic instability, may accept risks that external analysts deem unreasonable. Historical precedent shows that miscalculation often stems not from ignorance, but from divergent risk assessments. One side may view a limited demonstration as contained. Another may perceive it as an existential challenge requiring full response. This is why professional scenario planning does not rely on a single most likely outcome. It maps branches and sequels. What if enrichment progresses faster than expected? What if regional partners adjust their posture? What if diplomatic channels narrow? Each branch alters the calculus. This is where things change. The geopolitical layer adds further complexity. No significant nuclear development occurs in isolation. Alliance commitments shape thresholds for response. Ambiguous security guarantees increase the risk of miscalculation. Economic interdependence creates both leverage and vulnerability. Disruption to energy flows, coordinated financial measures, or market reactions can influence strategic calculations as powerfully as military posturing. Currency fluctuations, commodity price shifts, capital movement, these are not peripheral effects. They are strategic variables that feed back into decision-making at the highest levels. What happens next depends in part on the availability of diplomatic pathways. Even during heightened tensions, channels often remain open. Intelligence-backed channels, neutral mediators, multilateral forums. The presence or absence of viable mechanisms for managing escalation significantly influences whether a crisis resolves or expands. History demonstrates that some of the most critical diplomatic breakthroughs occurred not in calm periods, but at moments of maximum tension. The assumption that dialogue only functions before crises escalate is not supported by evidence. This is where most people miss it. They treat the human dimension as a secondary concern. But civilian consequences are not merely humanitarian considerations, they are strategic variables. Disruption to energy infrastructure affects not only immediate welfare but long-term stability. International legal frameworks require distinction and proportionality, but compliance varies under operational stress. And the long-term cost? Economic disruption often spans years. Social cohesion can fracture. Global markets can destabilize. These factors influence international response, domestic morale, and the feasibility of post-crisis governance. But here's the problem. Legal frameworks are often viewed as constraints that only matter after conflict ends. In reality, they shape behavior in real time. Under foundational international agreements, the use of force is prohibited except in self-defense or with appropriate authorization. Actions not meeting these criteria face significant diplomatic and legal challenges. Oversight mechanisms, international judicial bodies, universal jurisdiction principles, open-source evidence preservation depend on political will, but their mere existence creates leverage. The prospect of future accountability can influence tactical decisions, operational planning, and political risk assessment in the present. This is where things change. Scenario mapping provides structure without false certainty. Consider 4 plausible pathways, each with probability ranges that must be continuously updated. Pathway 1, diplomatic resolution. Triggers include successful back-channel engagement or face-saving concessions. Outcome, status quo or minor adjustments. Probability, 35–45%. Pathway 2, limited demonstration. Triggers, perceived provocation or opportunistic signaling. Risks, miscalculation leading to unintended escalation. Probability, 25–35%. Pathway 3, capability consolidation. Triggers, strategic miscalculation or perceived window of opportunity. Consequences, elevated regional tension. Probability, 15–25%. Pathway 4, protracted strategic competition. Characteristics, blend of technical progress, economic pressure, and informational operations. Probability, 10–20%. What happens next is not predetermined by these categories. Probabilities are not prophecies. They are tools for structured thinking, designed to mitigate cognitive biases like overconfidence or anchoring. A single new signal, a verified technical development, a diplomatic statement, a market shift, can alter the entire assessment. This is why professional analysis is not a one-time product, but a living process. Continuous assessment, iterative updating, and intellectual humility are not optional virtues. They are methodological necessities. This is where most people miss it. They seek definitive answers in an environment defined by uncertainty. But the most valuable analytical output is not a prediction. It is a framework for decision-making under ambiguity. Consider a structured approach. First, intent. What observable actions would confirm or refute specific operational intentions? Second, capability. Does the actor possess the technical capacity? Third, cost-benefit. What does the actor stand to gain versus likely costs? Fourth, thresholds. What actions would trigger irreversible escalation? Fifth, pathways. What concessions could enable de-escalation? Sixth, civilian considerations. What measures minimize harm? Seventh, coordination. Are partners aligned? Eighth, information environment. How is misinformation countered? Ninth, legal alignment. Are operations consistent with international law? 10th, end state. What does success look like? But here's the problem. Answering these questions requires more than data. It requires discipline to avoid confirmation bias, humility to acknowledge unknowns, access to quality information in an environment saturated with noise, and the courage to update conclusions when evidence shifts. In an era of algorithmic amplification and polarized narratives, these qualities are rare, yet they are essential. Because the cost of analytical failure is not abstract. It is measured in lives affected, stability eroded, opportunities diminished. This is where things change. The most powerful tool in high-stakes analysis is not more information, but better thinking. Clear, neutral, deeply reasoned assessment that separates signal from noise, probability from prophecy, preparation from panic. This standard demands rigor, questioning assumptions, testing interpretations against alternative explanations, and remaining open to disconfirming evidence. It also demands transparency, acknowledging uncertainty, distinguishing observation from inference, and communicating complexity without obscurity. What happens next remains unwritten. The path forward will be shaped by choices made in real time, under extreme pressure, with incomplete information. Technical experts weighing proliferation risks. Political leaders balancing domestic expectations against international consequences. Diplomats seeking pathways to de-escalation. Each decision, however small, contributes to the emerging outcome. This is where most people miss it. They assume that analysis ends when a conclusion is reached. But in dynamic environments, the conclusion is only the beginning of the next cycle of observation, assessment, and adaptation. The questions that matter most are often the ones not yet asked. What indicators are being overlooked? What assumptions are being taken for granted? What unintended consequences might follow? In high-stakes scenarios, intellectual curiosity is not a luxury, it is a safeguard. But here's the problem. Time is a non-renewable resource in crisis. Analysis must be thorough but not paralyzing. Decisive but not reckless. Balanced but not vague. This tension cannot be eliminated. It can only be managed through structured processes, diverse perspectives, and clear communication protocols. The goal is not perfect foresight. It is resilient decision-making. The capacity to adapt as conditions evolve, to learn from emerging outcomes, and to course-correct without losing strategic coherence. This is where things change. The ultimate measure of analytical value is not whether a prediction was correct, but whether it improved decision quality. Did it help leaders anticipate second-order effects? Did it illuminate trade-offs between competing objectives? Did it create space for options that might otherwise have been overlooked? In complex systems, the best analysis does not provide answers, it sharpens the questions. What happens next depends on our collective capacity to navigate uncertainty with clarity, humility, and purpose. To distinguish between what is known, what is not known, and what cannot be known. To prepare without provoking, to deter without escalating, to act without abandoning principle. These are not easy tasks. They require intellectual discipline, moral courage, and institutional resilience. This is where most people miss it. Analysis is often viewed as a spectator activity, but in high-stakes environments, analysis is a participatory practice. Every person who engages critically with information, who questions simplistic narratives, who demands evidence over assertion, contributes to a more informed public discourse. An informed discourse is a strategic asset. It creates space for reasoned debate, reduces vulnerability to manipulation, and strengthens the foundations of accountable governance. But here's the problem. The noise is loud. Misinformation spreads faster than verification. Emotional appeals often outweigh evidence-based reasoning. In this environment, maintaining analytical integrity is not passive. It is an active commitment. It means resisting the temptation to oversimplify. It means acknowledging complexity without surrendering to paralysis. It means communicating with precision while remaining accessible. This is where things change. The future is not a fixed destination. It is a landscape shaped by choices made in the present. Every signal interpreted, every risk weighed, every option considered contributes to the emerging reality. The responsibility is not to predict the future with certainty, but to prepare for multiple possibilities with wisdom. What happens next is still being written. By technical experts monitoring enrichment. By political leaders weighing options. By diplomats seeking pathways to stability. The process is ongoing, iterative, collective. And while confirmation of major developments may not yet exist, the indicators warrant attention, not alarm. Preparation, not panic. Clarity, not confusion. This is where most people miss it. They wait for definitive proof before adjusting their understanding. But in dynamic environments, waiting for certainty is itself a decision, one that can carry significant opportunity costs. The professional approach is not to act on speculation, but to prepare for plausible scenarios while continuously updating assessments as new evidence arrives. This is not indecision, it is disciplined adaptability. But here's the problem. Adaptability requires cognitive flexibility, the willingness to revise conclusions, to entertain alternative explanations, to acknowledge when initial assessments were incomplete. This is intellectually demanding. It requires setting aside ego, resisting confirmation bias, and embracing uncertainty as a condition of complex systems. Yet it is precisely this flexibility that enables effective navigation of high-stakes environments. This is where things change. The most enduring strategic advantage is not technological superiority, but the capacity to learn faster than the environment changes, to extract insights from emerging data, to adjust tactics without losing strategic coherence. This capacity is cultivated through culture, process, and leadership, not acquired through equipment alone. What happens next will be determined not by any single factor, but by the interaction of multiple variables: technical capability, diplomatic engagement, economic pressure, informational dynamics, and human choices. No model can capture all these interactions with perfect fidelity. But structured analysis can illuminate pathways, highlight risks, and create space for informed decision-making. This is where most people miss it. They seek a single narrative to explain complex events. But reality rarely conforms to tidy storylines. Multiple truths can coexist. A situation can be both precarious and manageable. An actor can be both rational and miscalculating. A crisis can be both urgent and containable. Embracing this complexity is not weakness, it is analytical maturity. But here's the problem. Maturity is often mistaken for indecision, clarity for simplicity, nuance for ambiguity. In public discourse, these distinctions matter. Communicating complex assessments without oversimplifying requires skill, the ability to convey uncertainty without vagueness, to acknowledge risks without alarmism, to present options without prescription. This is where things change. The standard for public analysis in high-stakes environments must be higher, not lower. Not more certainty, but more transparency about uncertainty. Not stronger assertions, but clearer reasoning. Not faster conclusions, but more rigorous processes. This standard serves not only experts, but the broader public, enabling informed citizenship, strengthening democratic accountability, and fostering resilience against manipulation. What happens next depends on our collective commitment to that standard, to valuing evidence over assertion, to rewarding intellectual humility over confident speculation, to creating space for diverse perspectives and rigorous debate. These are not abstract ideals. They are practical necessities in an interconnected world where decisions in one region affect lives globally. This is where most people miss it. They assume that neutrality means having no perspective. But professional neutrality is not the absence of judgment. It is the disciplined application of evidence-based reasoning, free from predetermined conclusions. It means following the data where it leads, even when it challenges assumptions. It means acknowledging limitations without surrendering to cynicism. But here's the problem. Maintaining this standard in a polarized environment requires courage, the willingness to withstand pressure from all sides, to prioritize truth over convenience, to communicate complexity without obscurity. This courage is not innate. It is cultivated through practice, supported by institutions, and reinforced by communities that value integrity. This is where things change. The path forward is not about choosing between optimism and pessimism. It is about cultivating realistic hope, the conviction that challenges can be navigated through reasoned action, even when outcomes are uncertain. This hope is not naive. It is grounded in historical precedent, human adaptability, and the demonstrated capacity for course correction when systems allow for learning. What happens next remains unwritten, but the process of writing it is already underway. In the quiet work of analysts, in the deliberations of decision makers, in the engaged citizenship of publics, each contribution, however small, shapes the emerging reality. The responsibility is not to predict the future with certainty, but to prepare for multiple possibilities with wisdom, integrity, and hope.